What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 33. Bet Parks presents Stick to Hockey Live. We've got a live episode for you today and a good one. Oh, I'm excited to talk to our guest today, Alex Appleyard. He's coming to us from the UK. We're going to get some scouting on the European prospects. We're going to get some conversation on the current team and the state of the current team, from Torts to Risto to Hayes to you name it. Oh, we got to go talk Morgan Frost. We got to go and tip it. We got to talk about Cam York. We got to talk about, holy shit, the 2 goals from Travis Konechny last night. Absolute filth on both of them. That backhand was ridiculous. Flyers get a win last night over Columbus. Yeah, Columbus is banged up. So are the Flyers. It's 2 banged up teams. I get it. You're missing huge element players like Couturier for the Flyers and Atkinson. You're missing Werenski, Boone Jenner for Columbus. I mean, they are banged up on the back end big time, but it was a win last night. But let me tell you about Bet Parks, because we're going to get to Alex in just a second. Bet Parks, the greatest mobile casino and sportsbook out there. It is fantastic. You need to download the app, check it out, start perusing it if you're not, or if you have it and maybe you haven't been on in a little while. Well, that's a great time to get on. You got great football action to get in on, the NFL, bowls. You've got college and pro hoops. You've got hockey, and anything in the world of sport you can get your action in on, from live in games betting to same game parlays, props, teasers, player performances. It's all there on the Bet Parks app. So make sure you grab it. You're going to have a little time off during the holidays. Might as well get a little action in on the games. So check it out. It's easy to sign up, fun to use, and faster to win than ever before. And right now, all new and existing users hit the promo code JASON750, JASON 750. And that'll get you a risk-free bet up to $750. Terms and conditions do apply on that. Again, for new and existing users. So download the BetParks app today. You do need to be over 21 and present in Pennsylvania or New Jersey. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. And also, great time to swing by Conquerville Subaru. Beautiful showroom on Route 202 in Glen Mills. Holidays time, and a great time to go down there and check out their great inventory, certified pre-owned inventory, incoming Subaru vehicles, and the Share the Love event, which goes on until January 3rd, where Subaru is going to donate $250 for every new car sold to one of 5 charities. You get to pick either the ASPCA, Make-A-Wish, Meals on Wheels, Nations Parks, or Conquerville's hometown charity, and it's a great one, Namor's Children's Hospital of Delaware. December, great time to visit the showroom on Route 202 in Glen Mills. Check out that certified pre-owned inventory and all the great Subaru vehicles, and great service department as well, where you get a free car wash with every visit. So check it out. Visit ConquervilleSubaru.com for all the details. Visit the showroom on Route 202 in Glen Mills, and remember that Conquerville cares. All right. Sometimes we go north of the border. Sometimes we go across the ocean, and that's what we do today. Thanks to modern technology, it is Alexander Appleyard coming to us live from the UK. Alex, how you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me on, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
I love that you cover the Flyers and you're so passionate about it, and you're over in the UK. Are there a lot of hockey fans over there? A lot of Flyer fans?
Not so many Flyers fans, but quite a lot of hockey fans. I think it's
there used to be a lot of Flyer fans, not lately.
I think it's very localized, big cities, some of the biggest cities, especially in the north, and Wales and Ireland and Scotland, Northern Ireland, have quite big hockey followings because, in the 90s and early 2000s, hockey was really quite big here, and we had a lot of teams getting 5,000 plus fans a night. So, Manchester, Sheffield, Nottingham, kind of Glasgow, Belfast, Cardiff, I would say, are quite big hubs. Growing up in Manchester, we had a hockey arena that was 17,500 seats when I was growing up. I mean, We rarely got more than 7,000, and had a team with, some really good players on. Frank Pietrangelo of NHL fame was our goalie for a while. So, going to watch hockey as a kid there was amazing. And my family's, been involved in American sports as well. My dad played American football as a linebacker in the British League. So, growing up, always watched sports highlights, and when I was maybe 5-6 years old, saw Eric Lindros on the hockey highlights and was like, that's my guy. This guy's like Batman on ice, So as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, that swayed me to be a Flyers fan. Whereas my dad's a Blackhawks fan and full Chicago fan. So
you guys are in the family's in a tough spot right now, right? When it comes to those two teams. The funny thing is, could you imagine if Lindros played today with the physicality? I think he'd be suspended so much, because not for hitting dirty, but I think the assumption that it's a dirty hit when you just blow a guy to pieces, and he would have to answer for every hit, even clean hits now. I don't know how he would be in today's game. Maybe he would be less physical, and that would have extended his career. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he wouldn't have. I mean, I think the other year I looked into it, and I think all but one of the hits that gave him a concussion would have been illegal in today's game.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, on that case, maybe he'd have played a bit longer. But yeah, I think he would have been suspended 15, 20 games a season because I don't think you could change that instinct from him. a lot of his hits weren't, like they weren't premeditated. It was just heat in the moment. I'm going to kill that guy. That's just how he was.
Yeah, and the thing is too, like he was so strong that guys would try and hit him, and then he would just buckle them. It was crazy. Like guys would fly off him like he was swatting bugs away. He's just so big and so strong.
One of the measures of it, I think, was the old Eric Lindros in the last couple of years of his career, and don't know if you remember that fight with Joe Thornton. A guy who's just as big as him, and also a guy who, when he was young, was a nasty POS, Joe Thornton, before he matured a bit. And I think Lindros broke his cheekbone in one punch, and it seemed like Thornton never really played the same way again. I think that was the thing that did it for me at his prime. He was one of the most skillful players in the league, one of the fastest players in the league, one of the biggest hitters, and also, I still love hockey fights, and the guy could throw down with anyone in the league and rarely lost. So, he was the complete package, really.
Yeah, he was pure entertainment to watch as well. Let's get your thoughts on what took place last night because the Flyers get a win. Kevin Hayes returned to the lineup after sitting a period and then a game. He has the healthy scratch the other night, and even though Zach McEwen couldn't go and they were down a forward, they opted to bring Justin Braun back in, go 11-7, which was further indication that Torts is not screwing around, and there is going to be accountability for not only pretty much all the players on the team. If you're going to do that to Kevin Hayes as your top point getter on the season, anybody is susceptible to having that happen. What did you think of the Hayes situation?
I think it's multifaceted. On one hand, he's been scoring points, but at the same time, his defense has probably looked worse than it ever has, and everyone who's been on his line with him has suffered as a result. You've had a guy like Konechny, who I think has been playing fantastically well this year, and when you look at the plus minus, when you look at the underlying defensive stats, his stats have, I think,
expected goals against are pretty high.
Because he's been playing alongside him, and Hayes has always been a bit like that. He's a bit of a hot dogger. Like he loves having the puck, he loves going up ice and taking risks, but he's just not been getting back probably as much as he really should be, and looked a bit disinterested at times. And I think some of that's the player. He's been like that since his college days. You're going to get probably 50 points a season from him and some great playmaking. And when he's on his game and really engaged, he's an okay defensive player, solid, nothing special. But this season, I think he's really neglected the defensive side, and you see him jump in the zone even earlier than usual. I mean, he's always been a bit guy who kind of likes doing that to get up ice and get up ice quickly. But and it's difficult because on one hand, Chuck Fletcher knew he was that player when he brought him in.
Mm-hmm.
The last few years, I think it's kind of been. I mean, he's not played as poorly the last few years defensively, but at times it's been kind of seemingly tolerated because he is a okay second line center, and that's a position that's at a premium in the NHL. And he was, one of Fletcher's star acquisitions. So it seemed before Tarts that it was just like Hayes will make mistakes, but they accepted it because that's kind of who he was. But I think as much as it's as a message against Hayes as well with Tartarelli, it's hard not to see the further implications of that, especially with him saying like, look, this guy is maybe not part of my plans going forward if he can't change how he plays. And I'm not sure he will because, he's 30 years old. Not many guys that age are going to be able to reinvigorate and change their game when they probably played like that since they were preteens, really.
You're not going to change a guy at 30 completely. No. You just have to have a little bit of that, want to do the right things and, kind of meet me halfway stuff. And the thing is I think that's why Torts moves him to the wing. He's going to go, okay, I need his scoring. I need his playmaking in the offensive zone. He works off the half wall better than he works in the middle anyway, in offensive zone. But I'm going to mitigate what he's bad at, which is defending, especially down below the dots in the D zone. And I'm going to make him a winger. I'll put Noah Cates there to handle that heavy lifting, and I'll put him on the wing. I always thought he was destined for the wing. I didn't know it was this early, especially on a team that's bereft of centers. But, moving him to the wing maybe mitigates that it has a better chance of making him a net positive player at both ends of the ice.
Yeah, I think so. I think most guys in the league are better at wing than center, because there's some specific special players, a guy like Couturier, Bergeron, the Datsyuks of this world, and, even Giroux when he was in his prime, those really high IQ guys who are good two ways are going to be better at C. But most players, I think, with the lack of responsibility defensive, or the lesser responsibility defensively, are a bit better at wing. And I think, if Hayes plays a whole season at wing, he's probably going to be a 55-plus point player there. So, but at the same time, it's difficult with the term left on his contract. And if he's not a center, his value is less on the market. And how many people will be willing to pick up that contract as it is? It's a problem that the Flyers could do without if Tots doesn't consider him kind of part of the future, or a guy he really wants to be in his kind of core guys. Because, that's seemingly in confrontation with what management kind of wanted to build this team around.
Yeah.
And as well, potentially causes more issues with cap and more issues with moving guys going forward.
What did you think of the hiring of Torts?
I think he's a good coach. I'm not going to beat around the bush there. He's not my style of coach. A lot of the hockey he plays, I wouldn't say is the hockey that I enjoy watching. I love the physicality side of things, but I do prefer maybe a bit faster paced.
Yeah.
More East-West hockey with, that's just how I am. I think some of that's growing up in Europe where, a lot of the Swedish league, which is the league I follow a lot, is the closest to the NHL in Europe, but there's maybe a bit more open play.
Bigger sheet of ice.
Yeah. So
I think a lot more East-West. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And so that's a preference, that's a personal preference. And I do think the league's going a bit more that way, but I don't have a problem with him as a coach. He's a good coach. He's got a good track record. And I do think, it's difficult to say, really, because it's hard to evaluate this team properly. But I think they'd be probably a bit worse without him if they had carried on how they were in the direction they were, say, last year. I do think they've improved maybe slightly under him in terms of the quality of players they have versus kind of where they are. But, it's a really bad team.
Yeah, there's so many guys hurt, and even at full strength, they'd still be lacking the requisite high-end skill. One of the big things that he's kind of tasked with, I think, Alex, this year is finding out who's who and who's what, and developing some of these young players. He's always been a pretty good development coach, going all the way back to his Tampa days. And you look at the development of guys like Zach Werenski. Would they been good players anyway? Absolutely, because they're incredibly talented players. But in developing guys, you can do that. And one of the things, a couple of players that we look at in particular, Morgan Frost, Cam York is a guy that he's got his hands on now, started out with the Phantoms. You had a guy like an Owen Tippett that's part of that Giroux trade that's got to, figure out where he fits in the NHL. I think the development of those guys, and even TK, kind of a reclamation project a little bit with him, I think is one of the bigger elements on his checklist that we're looking for him to accomplish in a positive way. Whether Morgan Frost is a bona fide NHL center or not, we got to find out.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the positives that can be drawn from this year is that most of the younger players are at least playing well or showing they can play in the NHL. York's only been up a few games, but he's looked heads and shoulders the Flyers' best defenseman. And he did look good last year, but not to this level. But he looks, obviously, it's difficult to evaluate some of the others. Provorov I think at this stage, you've got to say maybe he's just a second pairing defenseman. And Sanheim has his moments, but he's inconsistent. And he's probably also a second pairing defenseman. But York, I still think that he has potential. Maybe not to be a legitimate number one, but to be like a solid number 2, 3 defenseman. And, the kind of, I don't know, he's a very different player than them. But kind of, when Coburn and Matt Carl were alongside Pronger and Timonen and were fantastic players.
Yeah,
he has kind of the ability to be that level of player, even though he'll score more points than them. A guy who's going to be a solid number 2, can play 22 plus minutes a night.
Quarterback your power play too.
Yeah, exactly, and I think he's better defensively than than a lot of people see. In college, he was really great there. The World Juniors, he was relied on defensively and on the penalty kill, and he's a really smart player who knows how to use his body, knows how to get in the way of passing lanes, has a great stick. Yeah, I'm a fan of Cam York, and I think he's going to go far in the game, and it would shock me if he didn't become a kind of bona fide number 3 defenseman in a very short period of time. So it's good to see him now in in the NHL, hopefully full time.
Yeah, I think he's here to stay. I really
And
do.
as for the other guys, everyone knows the talent Konechny's got.
Mhm.
I think everyone can see that, and everyone's been able to see for a very long time that this is a guy who has the skill set to be a consistent 70-plus point player and a legitimate first-line winger. And over his career, he's had seasons like that, one big season like that, and maybe another couple of years where he's kind of on that cusp of a proper first-line forward. And this year, he seems to have really put things together. And I mean, I was shocked, to be honest, in some of that people thought that Torts wouldn't like Konechny, because I think the one thing that you've always got from Travis Konechny is you can see it, is his heart's always been in the right place, and the guy is not work shy in any way, shape, or form. He's always been one of the fittest guys on the Flyers, puts in a lot of work off ice. No one will ever question his work ethic. I just think, sometimes his passion takes over, and he's the kind of guy I always thought that on a better Flyers team would be adored. He's in the kind of mold of, a young Mark Recchi, not the same level of player, but like a young Mark Recchi, Rick Tocchet, Mellenby kind of.
Yeah, get in there, mix it up too. Like they always like that element, like very intense guy. I think he plays better when he's needling. It's just a higher level of engagement. But you're right, he's a guy that I've always seen as a guy that spills it. He always works his tail off. And under Torts this year, I think he's just come in and kind of he took the benching against San Jose, I think, the right way and came back. And I mean, you can always tell. I say this all the time. Don't ever listen to what a coach says he feels about a player. Look at how he uses a player. I mean, Konechny the other night played 26 plus minutes in a regulation game. He's putting him on the PK. He's on the number one power play. He's out there in all situations trying to preserve a lead or, tie a game up. I mean, that tells you the coach loves him.
Yeah, and I wasn't in doubt that he would, but it's nice to see him starting to look again like a 70-plus point guy, as opposed to what he's been for the last few years, which is a good, probably high-end second-line winger. But the Flyers really need him to be that legitimate first-line right winger, because Flyers went from having probably the deepest right wing group in the NHL a few years ago to then this year coming in with who's going to be the guy there. And Konechny's really, I think, taken that role on, and also taken seemingly he looks like a leader for the team. He talks a lot.
I've said that. Yep.
He talks a lot, and he also leads by example on ice. And I think maybe it's one of those things that, Giroux was always a guy who led by example on ice. And I think Konechny's, alongside someone like Lawton, is now kind of stepping into that. We're the guys who are going to go out there and set the tone, and we know we need to, and we have the skill set to, and also kind of the mentality to. Both of them like getting involved, both of them like mixing up, and it's really great to see that he's really thriving, because he's a fantastic player.
Yeah, and he's been a captain at every level prior to getting to the NHL. I think they should put it, when they eventually decide on who's going to wear a letter, I think he's a guy that should wear it. I think the removal of Giroux created that vacuum and that extra. Now there's a piece of the leadership pie to jump into, and I think he's a guy that has jumped into it. And I think that would be good if he was, he's part of the core. So I think he should wear a letter when they eventually do decide that, and who's the next captain, who's that going to be? Probably going to be Lawton. Actually, it's funny because I had a conversation with Couturier last night. I rode the elevator down with him, and he said pain-free, feeling good. He's going to get back on the ice maybe early January. So we'll see where it goes from there. He said he feels great, though. He's no residual pain or anything from the second surgery. So we'll see where that goes, because that's a huge question, right? Like, first year of this new deal, this guy is your top line center. And I mean, you need him with guys like Cutter Gauthier coming, and we'll see what they end up in this draft. I mean, you could end up deep at center if you get lucky in this draft and you end up with a Bedard or a Fantilli. And then all of a sudden you go, okay, I have Couturier if he gets back and back to somewhat what he was, and then Cutter Gauthier and, a high-end, another center. Now you're all of a sudden, you're going, man, we're really good up the middle.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that it's a good year to be bad if you need a center, because aside from maybe 2003, I don't think there's been a draft that on paper leading up to it has as many good centers as this one. It's just all C. There's so many guys down to 15, 16, 17 overall where you might get a first-line center.
Yeah.
So here's the draft for it.
Yeah, I mean, you don't hear many drafts compared to that 03, because that 03 draft's absurd.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. I mean, there's guys still in the league that were drafted in the 7th and 9th round. Like Halak was a 9th round pick. We saw him the other night. Joe Pavelski still getting it done, a 7th round pick in that draft. And then the first round is just, I mean, Burns in that first round. There's so many guys that are still in the league, with all these, even Carter, all these years later. So let's talk about, the path for this team, because, we heard the term aggressive retool last January. We're coming up on the anniversary. I'm sure we'll all celebrate and get out our noisemakers and whistles. But we heard that term in January of last year from Dave Scott in that press conference with Chuck Fletcher. They haven't used the term rebuild. Sorts is, knocking all around the term, but not saying it. But this, in essence, is a rebuild. But the timetable on a rebuild is really to be determined, because there's so many factors that go into it. The return of Couturier, the return maybe of Atkinson, Ellis. I think that we're not going to count on that. And then you couple that with draft lottery luck, and the timetable is yet to be determined.
Yeah, and I do think that this draft and where they fall in it, like, I'm not one for tanking. Like,
I agree.
It's so alien to me, as well as like a European sports fan in general. Everyone wants to do
counterintuitive.
Yeah, and as well, the guys on the ice, like everyone who's ever played sports to a decent level knows that everyone goes out there every single game wanting to do the best possible. It might be that their headspace isn't right. It might be the body isn't right. It might be they're just not that talented. But the fact that the Flyers are so low, I think, is just because they've just got a poor team on paper. But I think this draft will be key. I think if they can, it's sad to say, but if they get a top 5 pick, it should be very hard to miss on a legitimate first-line player, and hopefully a first-line center. And if, as it seems like is going to happen, they're going to miss the playoffs, well, at the trade deadline, if they could somehow get another first-round pick, then you might be able to maneuver yourself into a position where you can have a draft like, say, 2003 for the Flyers, which set the tone for the next. I mean, it's still, Carter and Richards. Couturier is a direct result.
Yep,
of those.
He's a byproduct.
Yeah, Frost and Farabee are effectively, in that kind of tree along the line. So, it's if they can have a draft like that, I think that will set the foundations. Because the one positive I would say is that the prospect depth, I don't think is our young player depth isn't a problem really at all. We've seen this year guys coming in. You've got Cates, you've got Lashinsky, you've got Allison, you've got now Tippett. These guys can play in the NHL, even if they might only be third-line guys. You still need those guys. And then, like a guy like Olli Lycksell came over to the AHL this year.
Yep.
I've been pumping his tires for a few years because, he plays the game the right way. He's a little ball of energy and he has a lot of skill. And he might only be a third-liner, but I don't think they have any problems in those areas. And even a guy they drafted last year, like Kaplan in the 3rd round, he's a really good player.
Mm-hmm.
A bit buried on a good team right now in the NCAA. But it would shock me if he wasn't a third-liner. And then, on defense, you've got York, and someone we'll probably speak about a bit later, Andre.
Yep.
And, Zamula has shown at times that he can hang in the NHL. He just needs to add a bit to his frame and be more consistent. And, you still got guys like we spoke about, like Konechny, who's very young. You've got Farabee, who's a legitimate NHL top 6 player already and very young. You've got Sanheim, who's, he's not a young anymore, but he's a legitimate top 4 defender, and seems like he might be one of the only older pieces that's around for a while, given what we've seen in the last year or so. So, I think they do have in 3 years time, the second pairing, third pairing, fourth line, third line, and second line, I'm not worried in the slightest about for the Flyers.
It's that top line and the top pair. Yep.
Yeah,
and you're setting goal.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the fact that we don't even speak about goalies anymore is fantastic, Yeah. My whole lifetime, we spoke about Flyers goalies, and now for the first time, pretty much maybe apart from about 18 months of Mason in my life, we're not speaking about it because Carter Hart is fantastic. And I think this year, the Flyers would be more in a position like last year if it wasn't for Carter Hart this year, because I don't think, say, Sandstrom's done that much wrong. He hasn't had many awful games. It's just the quality of shots against him at times has been overwhelming. And I think if you didn't have Carter Hart, I don't think the team's save percentage would be above 900.
Agreed.
So, he's amazing. And, we talk about Sandstrom, there's a future. Ersson's fantastic. I think Ersson's the best goalie prospect they have. Better than Sandstrom, better than another guy we'll probably talk about, Kolosov. Even better than, currently serving for the Russian Down Forces, Mr. Ivan Fedotov. Yeah, goalie really isn't an issue for the Flyers, and I think they'll get a really good backup out of those
Yeah,
guys as well.
what do you know about Kolosov? He's 20 years old.
I mean, the guy's an interesting player to say the least. I'm not going to pump his tires too much because goalies are really difficult to predict.
Yeah, it's a voodoo.
But you look at his profile and you look at how he plays. He's not the biggest goalie. That's the only thing that he maybe falls down on. Essen and Sandstrom are both normal size goalies. 6'2".
Yeah.
Kolosov's probably 6 foot. He's bigger than a guy like Michael Neuwirth, but he's not kind of the height that you'd expect from a modern NHL goalie. But he's an unbelievable athlete. He plays a chaotic style of netminding at times. He's very no one should be compared to Dominik Hasek. But that's the name that everyone knows.
A bit unorthodox, right?
Very unorthodox goalie who comes out, he makes very acrobatic saves. He's not scared to play the puck. And he's fun to watch and makes some incredible saves. And he's a legitimate KHL starter right now. He's at 9.915 save percentage now for Dynamo Minsk, and they are not a good team.
Yeah, so he's seen a lot of quality against.
Yeah, his backup is Konstantin Shostak, I think his name is. And he played last year on a legitimate KHL, top 10 team, and put up a .93920 percentage as a backup. And this year he's at .885. And he's also a Belarusian international. So it's not like this guy's a nobody who can't play. This guy's got a pretty decent track record. He also played in Liga and put up 900. So, and Kolosov is at .915 and he's at .888 or something. So
that's kind of the path from Sorokin and Shesterkin, playing 20 years old as a starter in the K. Then they just keep putting up great numbers after great numbers. And then they come over here and you look at both of those guys, I know a lot of the people you point to Shesterkin because of the year he had last year and won the Vezina, but I think Sorokin is nipping on his heels as being just as good. So I think Sorokin's unbelievable. Yeah. They both move. So they're getting great goalie coaching over there too.
Yeah. And he keeps growing in confidence as well. He's been in an all-star game now in the KHL. And also this week, he probably had, I would say, probably for him, the most important game of his career in the Channel 1 Cup. Now there's obviously no one apart from ex-USSR affiliated teams playing over there because no one's playing Russia. But Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Russia played a 3-team tournament in lieu of, the usual Czech, Finn, Swede, Russia games. And Kolosov backstopped Belarus to a very famous win, 5-4 over Russia in the shootout, stopped over 40 shots, and helped Belarus to beat Russia in their own kind of tin pot tournament, really, if we're being honest. So that was a big game from him, and he looked fantastic. And he's the guy who can be. He could probably next year or the year after be an okay NHL backup. The same as S. I think both of those, between those two, they're going to be the kind of future of the backup for position. Even though Sandstrom's immensely talented, but I just don't think he's as maybe got the mental game or as technically precise as those two in terms of his movement. He's an amazing athlete, but
he's great in post play.
Yeah, I don't think he's goalies do that.
Yeah, his post play has always been good, but it's getting out of off your knees when the puck comes to a higher spot that's kind of burned him a couple of times this year. Let's talk about some of the European guys, and you mentioned him, Emil Andre. He's second round pick a couple years ago, and he's a guy that is really on a nice path. People have said maybe he ends up being like a Chemo Tiemann type player. He had a great World Juniors last year as well, captain of the team. He had 8 points in the tournament. Where do you see it out of Emil?
This year's been fantastic, as good as you could have probably hoped for in terms of his development. I think, for context, I would say the SAL is probably a similar level league to the AHL. Maybe marginally better overall because you do not have you maybe have a higher top end. I mean, a higher top end and a slightly higher bottom end in terms of, the top end guys are guys who've played in the NHL. And the bottom end guys are guys who, were either drafted or 25-year-olds who have shown that they can play in a higher level European league. And on a kind of they shouldn't be as bad as they are, but on a poor team, he's been wonderful. He's been their best defenseman. And this team, only recently, this team now includes Nicholas Hjalmarsson. So
And Nick
And,
Chalmerson's playing over there.
yeah,
Wow.
it's got Chad Billings on it as well, the ex-Flames player. He didn't play very much. And then they've also got Erik Martinsson, who is a Swedish international. And Andre's been the pick of the bunch, like, easily. He's not on power play 1 either, but putting up fantastic numbers. Like, right now, he's playing over 20 minutes a night. He has 17 points in 25 games. So, like, 0.68 points per game. And I think less than half of them have been on the power play. And for context, if he continues at the current trajectory this year, he'll have the second highest point total in Swedish Hockey League history for a guy under 21 from D. Like, the only guy will have higher is David Rumblad, who is, a very talented player who never really made it. And so he's on a really good trajectory, and on a better team, he'd probably have more points, and he's not playing power play 1. So, yeah, it's really impressive. And the underlying numbers are also fantastic. Like, he's the only regular defenseman on that blue line who's over 50% Corsi. He's at 53. Every single teammate he's playing with, he's elevating. And he's also, I think for a smaller player, he has the things that you need to succeed, in that he's really gritty. He has a fantastic sense of leverage. That's one thing that I wouldn't compare him to Chemo Timonen in many things, but his lower body strength is similar. Like,
Chemo's lower body was enormous.
Yeah, he's a similar height. He's a similar height, but he understands how to use leverage, and he doesn't often get pushed around.
Yeah.
He was up last year. I watched a game where he was playing against Victor Eitzel, who was over at the Blackhawks for a brief time. And that guy's 6'5", 6'6", and probably 210, 15 pounds. And Andre went head-to-head with him and held his own around the net because he's really got a good sense of leverage and is a strong kid. The one thing that I do think he will still need to improve on is his skating. Like, he's getting better. He's getting a lot better. And his gap control has improved massively. That was my big issue with him. In his post-draft year, he lost his gap so often. Whereas now he keeps a good. I think his back with skating's got better. He's more maneuverable.
Was he too tight on a guy and he could get turned?
I think he either got. He's very aggressive. I mean, a really aggressive, like a very stereotypical modern defenseman in terms of how he plays the blue line. He likes to step up early. He likes to make body contact, or if not get body contact, get a stick near body. And I don't think he was a good enough skater at the SHL and Allsvenskan level to do that consistently. Whereas now he's doing it. He's been able to, make those adjustments, and a slight improvement in skating, I think, means he's not that step behind. And it's really showing, it's a very good league, maybe the third best league on earth. And he's been maybe not a number 1 defenseman, but close to it this year for them. So it's really
he's a good leader too.
Yeah. I mean, everyone you speak to speaks about him as a kid with his head really well screwed on, who knows what his role is on the ice, who, if a coach tells him something, he's going to do it. Regardless of if it's his skill set or not, he'll play for his coach, play for his teammate, and all his teammates, respect the guy. And that's the reason he's had a C on his chest since he was probably about 15 years old on and off. And you see it even in the SHL. He's one of the younger players on the team, but on ice he leads from the front, and he's not afraid to stick up for himself and teammates as well. I'm not sure he leads the team in penalty minutes this year, but he's right up there. I mean, some of that's a bit dubious. He got ejected from a game the other day for a cross-check that probably shouldn't have been. So that was a nice 25 minutes added on. But, he doesn't worry about roughing it up. And in terms of the future, he's a guy who should be an NHL player. He probably could, it's always difficult to say with, the transition from big ice to small ice, but it wouldn't shock me if he could play in the NHL right now and be better than some of the guys the Flyers have iced this year on the blue line. I do think he's going to take some transition time. And
maybe he comes over, plays a little AHL just to get used to the pro game here in the smaller ice, because it is daunting. Like, to go right from that big ice to the NHL, you're going to lose, time and space, and then you're going to lose time and space and real estate when you come over. That's a big thing. It's markedly bigger. I think it's 3,000 square feet total bigger. That's a lot.
Yeah, significantly. And for him, he's a guy that I would say that in terms of upside, the only Flyers defenseman currently in the organization with maybe a higher upside, unless we're talking someone like Provorov or Sanheim completely putting their game together over the next 2 years, is York. I think he's got a higher upside than Zamula. Zamula's probably more likely to reach his floor as an NHL player. But Andre, if everything went really, really well from now on, it wouldn't completely shock me to see him become kind of a really good number 3 defenseman who can put up 40 points a season.
Yep.
Quarterback a power play, maybe alongside York, funnily enough.
Yeah.
But it's the big test for him now will be next year, because I think he'll come across to North America.
Yep.
Because I don't think he has anything left to do now in Sweden. There was a big question.
You get to a certain point and it's kind of like, diminishing returns. I've been there, done that. I've surpassed this league.
Yeah, I mean, last year in the Allsvenskan, the second tier, he proved a lot of critics wrong in terms of improving his gap control and having a fantastic year where he was probably in contention for the defenseman of the year in that league, really, all things considered. He helped get his team promoted, maybe one of the key one or two players who did that. And then it's like, well, can he play now in the SAL and do the same? And he's doing the same on a team that isn't dominant like they were last year in the second tier. So I think next year he should come over, and it would be a shock if he didn't prove to be very good in the AHL. And then the only question is how he transition to the NHL, where you are facing effectively the best players in the SAL every night on the NHL team's third and fourth lines,
Yeah.
So,
it's relentless. You're playing the best players in the world, and they're big boys and they're strong and they can just do so much in little spaces. And the thing is too, when you get over to the NHL, the defenseman development is different than it is for a forward, because first of all, any mistake you made is more pronounced. You can't hide. But I'm looking forward to seeing him and, seeing him come over next year and seeing what kind of camp he has and, start to knock some doors. Like you mentioned, Ole Lixell, who played over there as well and is with the Phantoms now. We got the chance to see him last week for a couple of games. I thought he made some plays. You could see the skill there. But I remember early in camp talking to Torts, and Torts said, this guy is like, I had no idea who he was, but I kept seeing guys, because he was watching from above from the perch, making plays. And every time you go, who's that guy made a play? Oh, it's Lixell. Look at his sheet. Who's that guy? Oh, it's Lixell again in the right spot. Just good instincts around the net and those kind of things. And, probably not a top six guy, but another guy that can kind of fill in that bottom six. And if you can check all those boxes in your bottom six, making the job of acquiring high-end talent, which is not easy, or developing it is going to be all what they need to do. Let's talk about Tumala, because he's a guy that, there's some expectations there. He's a second-round pick, but where are you seeing his game right now?
It's really difficult to say. I mean, I watched him last year, and it was
he's in the tier 2 league, correct?
Yeah. Last year, it was a complete horror show. Like, I'm not mincing my words about that. He has an amazing skill set, great shot, great speed, but he just looked lost constantly. In the AHL, he looked lost. In Liga, he looked lost. Like, when he got a chance at the international level, he looked lost. Like, he just looks a step behind a play because the big issue with him is his hockey IQ. He just struggles to read the game at a high level, and as he was exposed to higher levels, I think it was really apparent. There's no doubt in that skill and the physical ability. But yeah, he just needs to learn to read the game better. And this year, when he played a few games of Liga to start the season, and once again looks completely outmatched. He's on the fourth line getting healthy scratch because he just couldn't do the small things that could keep him in a lineup and not be a negative for his team. On a team that was playing young players, the last year and this year, there was a lot of other young Finns who were getting time, and he was getting scratched because he just couldn't play the game the right way. Now he's been loaned down to Myrtetus, and he's been on two teams. He's been on Pelitat and now Katera. And yeah, the stat sheet is good, and he's been playing well there. There's no doubt about that. He's basically goal a game, 11 in 12, with like 20 points in 12 games. But I would say the caveat to this is that the Myrtetus is not the Allsvenskan. If a guy's doing well in the Swedish second tier, he can probably play in the Swedish Hockey League and do an okay job. Myrtetus is a far lower level. It's probably not quite ECHL level, the Myrtetus. So it definitely has to be taken with a pinch of salt. But it's promising. Like, there's almost no direct comparable because so few players of that potential ever play in that league. Once they're 17, 18, because if you have an NHL future, for the most part, you're playing Liga at 19, 20, because there's no need to be playing in that second tier. So it's difficult. He's playing well, and the stat sheet looks good, but we won't know until he's back in Liga or in a comparable league. If he goes to the AHL again, or if, say, he moves to Sweden or Switzerland or the Czech Republic, he's probably not going to. He's probably going to stay in Liga or move to the AHL. But I think it's impossible to tell until we see him against those better players. Because of that issue of the IQ, when you're at a lower level, your IQ can be covered by that speed and that shot and that skill. Whereas when you're playing a guy shift in, shift out every single time you're up against anyone who can read the game better than you, that's when you really get left behind. So
yeah,
hope he keeps scoring because I think he's when he was drafted, I wasn't upset with the pick. I think he's a solid player with a lot of skill, and it was roughly the range he should have been drafted in, I thought. But we'll have to see next year, or if he goes back up because he's only on loan. It might be that in the new year, maybe they go, you know what, we're going to take another look at this guy and see if, with some renewed confidence, he can actually play in Liga. But I think it's a really difficult one to project right now. He has the skill set to be a Middlesex NHL guy who's going to get 40 points and 20 goals because he has an amazing shot and great speed. But yeah, we won't know until we see him at the Liga or AHL level because that level is ECHL and really hard to project from.
Yeah, that's a big leap to go to that. You got a chance to see Adam Ginning quite a bit, I'm sure.
Yeah.
He's a pick from back in the 2018 draft, 22 years of age. Now he's a big boy too. What's your projection on him?
If I'm honest, I don't see him being really
AHL?
much than a fill-in.
Yeah.
It might be, to be honest, it wouldn't shock me to see him have like a Robert Hegg style career. I think he's maybe got a better natural skill set. I mean, physical skill set than Hegg. He's a better skater. He also has some skill, but he's also a guy who can get caught behind the play. He kind of loses men and struggles to kind of read the game at a high pace. He has the physical skill set, but I struggle to see him as a full-time NHLer unless it's just kind of as a fill-in or a number 6 with a really good puck-moving partner.
Yeah.
I've watched a bit of him on the Phantoms, and he's looked a bit better in the AHL than the SAL, and that might be partially due to skill set because I think he's a guy who is probably better when he relies on just like a kind of a faster paced game where he doesn't have time to think. Whereas at Swedish Hockey League, I think sometimes he had time to think about things and often made the wrong decision. So maybe the kind of bang nature of smaller ice suits him slightly better.
Sometimes you think and you can overthink.
Yeah. But at the same time, you're watching him alongside some of the other younger guys. And I think he's not played as many games this year, but when he has, I think Linus Hugby has been better, slightly better.
Mm-hmm.
And, you've got a guy like Ronnie Attard, who's been better. He's not known for his kind of defensive aspects, but I think he's been, pretty similar on that regard. Zamula's obviously been better. So when you start putting him against guys his own age group in the same league, you're like, well, if he's behind those guys in terms of the
he's not
play,
there's not a path.
How's he against the NHL? So he might play a few games. He might, play half a season here, but I struggle to see him being a positive impact at the NHL level.
What do you think of Adder? Because we saw him last year. His energy, off the ice and around, is unbelievable. The guy is just always huge smile, very positive, and he's got a bomb for a shot. But he's gonna, right side guy. Projection on him, you think, at the NHL level as a third pair right side guy, if he can get there.
Yeah, I think he has the skills too, but it's just about getting that consistency. I think we saw last year, he'd have amazing moments where you're like, wow, this guy's an NHL player. And then he'd do something that you just you cannot do that.
Yeah, he'd over pursue a play outside the dots quite often.
Yeah, so I think it's rounded out that game. And I do think, like you said, he's the kind of guy that if he puts it together, he can easily be a third pairing defenseman and do a job. He's never going to be the most solid defensively, but so long as he can kind of get break even or just under, I think his play driving and his offensive ability will kind of make up for it. He's the kind of guy that in an ideal world, you would have a 23-year-old Justin Braun to put on the left side with him.
Yeah.
Like a lefty Justin Braun at the same age. But
yeah. The thing with him, he scores that goal last year on Jack Campbell off the rush, coming down the right side. And the shot, Campbell was like, who the hell's this dude? I've only seen that kind of shot from, Matthews in practice. You know what I mean? I was like, ooh, the play. It was just a beautiful shot that just beat Campbell. I don't love Campbell. I'm not a huge Campbell fan, but still, he's a legit NHL goalie. But anyway, it's great stuff on the European guys. Anybody else that you want to mention?
In terms of the Euros, I'm always gonna say that I do think Linus Hugby can still be an NHL player in that number 6 role. I mean, we saw him up. I think he's maybe a bit out of the organization's plans now, going off the. I mean, he's been, I think, a bit banged up at times, but he's not playing kind of every game for the Phantoms. I think he's the kind of guy who maybe towards the end of this year, once they completely out of a playoff spot, they should probably once again give another look and give him maybe 20 games this time, because I do think he can be a solid number 6 defenseman because he's great at the line and a very good skater.
Yeah.
He's probably the only other guy right now who I'm going to talk too much about. And
how about for the draft? Anybody over Europeans? Give me a couple guys that the Flyers could target that maybe, in that first round or even in the second round, that might be good players that they can look after. I know Yoki's over there, Joachim Grunberg. The Flyers had a European scouting, is all over these guys. A couple of guys that, are really going to pop in this year's draft.
Well, I mean, you've got the big name Swede in this draft, and he might be available when the Flyers take him, when the Flyers pick. He's also a C, is Leo Carlsson. Mm-hmm. Leo Carlsson he's proving that he can hold his own in the Swedish Hockey League right now. He's a great playmaker. He's a biggish guy, 6'2", 6'3", 17,
Give me a comp, an NHL comp on him.
That's a difficult one.
Especially for a kid so young. But
I mean, if everything went perfectly, maybe you'd say he's more like a modernish day Sundin, like not as physical, not the same, but a playmaker, primarily a playmaker who plays well defensively.
Bigger frame too.
Sundin
is a big frame guy too. Yeah,
not quite as big as Matt's, but I think he can be the kind of guy who, if things go well for him in his career, he can be a 75 plus. He can be a 75 plus point guy, and then you also have like quite a few Slovakians in this draft. Like Dvorsky, he's also in Sweden. He's a really good player who can play C. I don't know if he's going to be a C full time. So he's a guy who might go top 10. And then Edwards, I think his surname is Sale, but Saleh, I don't know how precisely to pronounce it. But he's a guy who's really, really showing at a very high level, and could also be a guy taken in this maybe 6 to 10-ish range for a winger, but he has everything, like really high skilled. He could be a franchise type player. So they're maybe the €3 early on. I mean, there's obviously Matvei Michkov, who.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about next, because the big question with him is, when is he going to get here?
Yeah, and that's the problem, especially with what's going on in Russia right now.
Yeah,
like he's committed, I think, to play in the KHL for maybe another 2 years or so, and he's an amazing talent, but would be they willing to wait that long to bring him over? It wouldn't shock me if he fell to maybe like 4 or 5 just for that fact.
Because if you're drafting this high in this draft, you want almost an immediate return on your pick, and waiting is hard to do.
Yeah, it's going to be really difficult to, if he's there when you pick and you have, say, a guy like Sale or Carlson alongside them, you're like, well, do we take a guy who could potentially be a 100-point player, but we're going to have to wait 3 years? Or do we take a guy who maybe next year or the year after could be a 75-point player? I think it gets more difficult once you're starting to pick at, say, 2. If you've got Fantilli versus him, I think you take Fantilli, because of position, and also because of immediacy of impact, and because of the lack of concern about, is he going to come over, what's going to happen there.
You have Fantilli rated head-to-head, all things being equal. Would you rate Fantilli ahead of him?
In terms of ceiling, I don't think so. I think if you go in for absolute who can be the best, Michkov is up there just after Bedard in terms of what he can be. This guy can be a 100-plus point player. Fantilli probably can as well, but I think Michkov might be maybe more of a game changer in 5, 6, 7, 8 years' time. But there's not a whole lot between them. You're talking like if one of them is a 110-point player, one of them is going to be a 100-point player, and maybe Fantilli can bring other things to the game that Michkov can't. So, I mean, if you ended up with either of those guys, like, I'd be happy. It's just with Michkov, do you wait that long?
So Bedard is the number one consensus at this point.
Oh yeah, I don't think.
It's absurd watching him.
Yeah,
absurd,
unreal. He's the kind of guy who can be. You hesitate to say McDavid, Crosby, but
he's got better numbers than McDavid had at that same age in the same league.
Yeah, he's a special player. Really special player. So that's going to be interesting. And there's a lot of other guys who are just really interesting in this first round as well. Guys who aren't even talked about, who you're like, well, he could also be like a star kind of player. There's just so many, and it's incredible to see how many of these guys are just going to be high end. There's a guy like Matthew Wood who's putting up basically point per game in NCAA in his draft year. You don't hear him mentioned because there's so many other guys that kind of drown out guys like that. Whereas usually they'd be right up amongst the favorites for number one. And I think that's the thing that this draft really has. you're talking maybe 20 guys who would usually go top 10. So
Yeah,
great chance for the Flyers to pick someone up.
that's the thing. You kind of mentioned it earlier. It's not that you're bad in sports sometimes.
Yeah.
It's you got to be bad at the right time. Because you can be bad and end up with a Nail Yakupov. Now, Edmonton won the lottery like 17 times out of 19 years, but and they ended up with David and Draisaitl, and yet they're still struggling. I mean, they lost to Anaheim the other. I mean, how can a team with McDavid and Draisaitl lose to Anaheim, who's won 2 regulation games all year?
Yeah.
Can you explain that? I mean, it's a team game. That's the point. But and no one player is going to fix anything. You got to build a team. And I don't know. You can build a team there in Edmonton with what those 2 guys are getting paid and what they're going to continue to get paid. But that's the thing is, it's amazing that you got to be bad at the right time, and then you got to get a little luck. Like Colorado that year, I mean, they're the last place team by 20 points in 2017, right? They already have McKinnon, they got Landeskog, they got Rantanen. They end up the worst team in the league by 20 points. They dropped to 4th in that draft, and Joe Sakic is ripshit pissed about that. But Cale Makar's there, and they end up with Makar, who wasn't considered generational going into that draft, but is turning into a generational talent.
Yeah. That's the one thing though with this draft that I do think like you're gonna have to be really unlucky to screw it up, especially if you pick top 5, because I can't see many of these guys failing. They're all. You look at the skill sets, you look at the profile statistically, and the comparable. There should be 10 plus first line 75, 80 point players in this draft. Yeah. If you're just looking at normal like projections for these guys.
And you combine that with Cutter Gauthier. What did we saw him in World Juniors the other night on that top line with Logan Cooley. He's playing top PP. He's playing on the wing. He's not playing center, but he picks up two assists in that game, and he's having a really good season so far in the collegiate game. Player of the month, and really kind of came in and did the right things. Coach was hard on him at first, had to teach him a few lessons, which is good, and kind of get him acclimated to Torts. But what have you seen out of Gauthier? Because to me, he looks like a Kreider type. The skating, the size, the shot.
I think it's easy to see that he could be a 70-point first-ish line NHL winger.
Mm-hmm.
Like I hesitate to think that he can be a center. I must be honest. I think he's better on the wing. Like the way he uses his size on the wing is probably better. His shot it's probably nicer to have that extra open space and maybe more time on the rush.
Yeah.
But you look at him and Farabee, and in a couple of years, I think they should provide you with a first line left wing and a second line left winger. Yeah. So he's a good player. Like there's no doubt about that.
I like a little size on the wings too. I like, especially in the D zone, because you're going to get into a lot of corner and board battles there, and you need a guy that can go in there and win those spots 50-50s.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing for me why this draft is so important for centers. On the left you've got Farabee and Gauthier, who are both young, and then in depth, you've got loads of guys. We already mentioned like Cates, who's a left wing, has been a left wing primarily for most of his college career, and now playing center. You've got Lixell, who's also a left wing, and then you go over to right wing, and you've got Konechny, who's penciled in as one of those top 6 guys, and then between Tippett, Allison, etc., you should probably get a good third line winger who can be
Brink in that mix too.
And obviously, he's injured, but Bobby Brink. Yeah, I've loved that guy since before he was drafted, and I think he's going to be a second line winger who's going to be a really good power play player.
Yeah, as well. Watching that skating is so bizarre, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always been.
I think he's going to throw Torts for a loop when he first sees him skate.
Yeah, I think the good thing that we have with Brink though is the guy loves getting into those gritty areas and has sticking his nose in. Like I think Tart's going to really love that and be able to. Deal with the shortcomings of his skating because, this guy's skating has been questioned since he was 16 years old and it's just not made a difference at any level so far. He's improved a lot. Yeah, he's improved a lot.
He gets to the right spots, He did it at the NHL last year too. He always ends up in the right spot. You look at the stride and it's just, it's ugly, frankly. And you go, there's no way this guy's going to be able to survive in the NHL because it looks so bizarre, but he gets to the right spots. And like you said, it's been questioned everywhere, and he's put up numbers everywhere.
Yeah, Exactly. You know, at the highest level at World Juniors, he looked great.
Yep.
The NCAA, he looks great. And when he got his cup of coffee with the Flyers, he looked great.
Yeah.
So that's why the center position is so important. You know, you have
Last thing-
Couturier, but
Yeah, it is. It's everything. You need to be good up the middle. Last thing for you. Is this situation with the Flyers as doom and gloom as we see on social media?
I think it's difficult in terms of there are just so many questions right now.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest question for me about the whole, you know, the players they have are what they are. The prospects they have are okay without too much high-end talent. You know, we've talked about, you know, Konechny and Farabee and Brink and Gauthier, York and Andre, and they are the standout kind of young guys.
Maybe Tippett is part of that too.
Alongside Hart, but how many of those guys, you know, maybe Farabee, Konechny, and Gauthier are the guys who you're like, okay, they'll be 70-point players.
Yeah.
And York, you're like maybe a number 2 defenseman, but that leaves 2 enormous holes. And I mean, we haven't spoke about him, but, you know, one good positive as well is Morgan Frost's been playing really well this year.
Yeah.
And I think you start to see that this guy could be a 50-point center. You know, he works really hard defensively, and I think he's got a bit stronger, which has really helped because he's always wanted to do the right thing. He just used to get bullied.
Yeah.
So it's been nice to see his confidence. So maybe you can say, you know, if he keeps having a good year, maybe you could pencil him in as a middle 6 center going forward if he's going to stick at center. But they need a number 1 defenseman and a number 1 center probably, because Couturier is very good, but versus the top teams, you look at those top teams and Couturier, might be, when he's fully fit, the 13th, 14th, 15th best center in the league. But those top teams have all a top 6, 7, 8 center, and then a guy who's probably 20th, 25th best in the league as well. So if Flyers want to compete within the next 5 or 6 years, they're going to have to find a franchise center and a franchise defenseman, and that's
franchise right side guy for sure, because so much of the game is limiting the damage of the opposition's number 1 line.
Yeah.
You know, when Niskanen was here that year, you know, Ovechkin had in 4 games no points against the Flyers. The Bergeron, Pasternak, Marchand line, I think, only had 3 points combined in 3 games. And just limiting the other team's top line that's the job. And that is every good team in the league has got a top line like that. They just do, right?
Exactly. So they have to go out there and hopefully in this draft find themselves a 1C first and foremost. I'm not sure there's a legitimate, really, really, you know, apart from maybe in the top 10 if they're very lucky. I don't think there's going to be a legitimate, easy to identify 1D in this draft.
Yeah.
There are a few really good guys, but I think they'll be off the board kind of by 10 because the forward position is so strong and the D is a bit weaker. But the center
That's
position.
the hard part. It's that high end talent. I mean, there's not a high end talent tree outside the skate zone where you can just go out there and pluck one off. You know,
and
you don't get rid of it. You don't trade it, you know, or let it walk.
And I think the Flyers were spoiled for a number of years in terms of we saw it as normal to be able to get these high end talent guys later in the draft. You know, it happened with Gagne. It happened with Richards. It happened with Giroux. Like they managed to acquire, you know, franchise players with 20th, 25th overall picks, and that isn't normal. You know, when you start running the numbers on it, it's one guy a year after 15th overall who becomes a 1C or 1D. You know, you can pick up first line wingers relatively easily in this league. You know, guys who are going to score 60 points from wing. But
the center's a different animal. It's
exactly.
Different. And you need a guy like they need a guy they can chuck over the boards that the other team, as soon as he jumps on the ice, goes, "Oh shit, he's out here." You know what I mean? That can just take over in a shift or take over a game. You know, scoring always off the rush, just doing magical things. And that's a hard thing to find, and that's what we're hoping to come out of this draft with for sure. No doubt about it.
Exactly. And I think that when you've got Bedard, Fantilli, and Carlson, he'll probably all be there in the top 5. You start thinking, well, maybe it's one of them. Maybe it's one of them. So.
Yeah. Dude, Alex, this was awesome. I really appreciate it. Where can people find your stuff? Smart. What is it? The website? Smart.
Yeah. It's www.smartscouting.com, and on Twitter you can find me at AV Appleyard. And yeah, that's pretty much where I'm doing most of my stuff. Not quite as active as I was a year or two ago, but still there all the time.
Well, do yourself a favor and stay off Twitter as much as you can to keep your sanity over the holidays. And then for the new year, re-engage, but only to a point. It's always fun. Hey, man, I really appreciate this. This was awesome. I loved your perspective and everything you had to say. It was a fun conversation. I hope people enjoyed it as well. Give Alexander a follow on Twitter and check out Smart. What is it? Smart Prospects?
Smartscouting.com.
Scouting. Damn, I'm so bad. Well, thanks for doing this, man. Have a great holiday, all right?
Yeah, you too, Jason. Have a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year.
Awesome. There he is, Alexander Appleyard, coming to us live from across the pond. Awesome stuff. I really appreciated him joining us, and it was a great conversation, and I hope everybody enjoyed it as well. He's a guy that does great stuff on Twitter. That's where I've been seeing his stuff for a couple of years now. So I appreciate him coming on. Check out the BetParks app. Get on it. Get on the action tonight in the hockey league, in the basketball leagues, in football this weekend, college and pro. You got bowl games. Take it from me. The BetParks app is fantastic. It's everything you want in a mobile casino sportsbook, right in your pocket. It travels with you. It's on your phone. Easy to sign up, fun to use, and faster to win than ever before. So download the BetParks app today. Must be 21 or over and present in Pennsylvania or New Jersey. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, we'll be back Friday. We're going to check in with Julie Robenheimer for a World Junior update. Give us the download on that and much more on Friday's edition of BetParks Presents Stick to Hockey Live. Everybody, have a great Wednesday. We'll talk to you Friday right here.